I was sitting in a movie theater alone, which is in itself maybe a sad thing, I don't know. And this is obviously not recently. This was back in the day when movie theaters were open. And I was sitting in it and I was watching a movie based on this book by an author named Ryan Stevenson, in the book called Just Mercy, and the movie by the same name. And it's about a lawyer who travels into the South to work for anti-death penalty cases. You may or may not know that I have a little involvement with River Bend Maximum Security Institution here in Nashville, and I'm just a volunteer chaplain. I just go in there every so often and spend some time with the guys there. And I've been a chaplain, or the appointed chaplain, at the time of execution for an inmate there, the last one to be executed. And I'm sitting in the movie theater and I'm watching this movie, and it shows the execution of a man, and I just start crying. And I'm sitting in the theater and there's nobody around, and I am kind of alone with myself, and I am just kind of wound up into this coil of sadness and despair, and maybe the movie is evoking a little bit of what I haven't come to experience myself through the secondary trauma, perhaps, of going with someone to the execution chamber. And it released a little bit of everything in me. And it was a time where I just felt completely just mush, and just open and vulnerable and horrible. I've never considered myself a racist. In fact, I could probably bring a few accolades to my resume to prove you otherwise. But I've recently become convinced that I am. And I read in Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, one of the most convicting sentences, regardless of where I think I come from or what I think I stand for, that I've ever read. And the sentence said, the most threatening racist movement isn't like, for example, the extreme movements to create like a white supremacist state. But the most threatening racist movements are the regular American strive for a race-neutral state, for a colorblind state. He goes on to defend, and there's much more to be said there, but this is one of the most convicting things I've ever experienced. I grew up in a small town in Georgia where I would have considered myself, again, race neutral, and it would have been a badge of honor for sure. And I grew up there, and I could not think for the life of me, when I began to think about my history and my experiences with race and my experience with power and privilege, I could not think for the life of me of like any things to doubt, like I said, my good credentials as a non-racist. And then throughout a few series of things, I came to stumble upon our city's plaque that's sitting in my house. It's on my kitchen table, and it's a little bit stained because it's actually a flower pot holder for a flower, and I don't really think about it a lot. But here it is, my city in Georgia, established in 1795, and its kind of iconic picture right here is the old market house. And this has just always been a key part of my life. I grew up walking underneath the old market house. I grew up with it being the center of our downtown and the icon of our city life. And I also grew up calling it the slave market, because it has everything short of the auction blocks where slaves were sold there once upon a time. I had to interrogate my own history and so do we. Especially in the church, I've come to see things through a new light, and so do we all together. How many songs from our hymnals do we sing that were written by slave owners? How many times do we say the word race or racism in our prayers according to our common book? When we, the early American church, baptized slaves, we made sure first that they knew that they would not, quote, that baptism would not, quote, alter the condition of the person as to freedom or bondage. And when we married slaves in the early American church, we changed the phrase from death, until death do you part, to until death or distance do you part, because of the likelihood that slave families would be divided and sold apart. I, as a pastor in a white church, am now under this burden myself in a whole new way. And I don't know what to do about it, but I'm doing something. It's said that the church thinks in centuries. It's like, have you guys heard that quote before? It's like a quote that's like a badge of honor kind of thing, like the church it's an appeal to the long-standing tradition of the church, and that it's gone for so long that, things happen really quickly, but the church doesn't take anything quickly. It thinks in centuries, but it also speaks to its slow evolution. But that's a luxury that we can no longer afford. When the foot is on a black man's neck for nearly 9 minutes, it's just made me think that we have to move and account for minutes and not just centuries. So I clicked on this past Sunday's liturgy, and I clicked at the very beginning of our Eucharistic prayer, thinking about George Floyd and nearly 9 minutes. And I clicked on the Eucharistic prayer, and then I watched it all the way through the Eucharist, through the one hymn that we sang. This is this Sunday, you can do it. All the way to the closing amen of our post-communion prayer. Nearly 9 minutes.